What's up, everybody? How you doing? This is AD Shabazz again for another topic on what is. This topic today, you know, is a very controversial and it's a very important and prominent topic that I believe that we're still dealing with to this day. And I want to apologize, for all the noise out there. It's, summertime and people, partying out there. So, and they just started, so I apologize for the noise, though, but I'm gonna try to do my best there. And I'm kind of nervous, so I'm gonna do my best to massage into this, But again, I want to, this is gonna be a topic called "What is the Willie Lynch letter?" And I want to start from the beginning, when everything kind of started, from what I recall and from my research, because in 1492, Christopher Columbus, he discovered South America, and once they discovered that new land, they wanted to build this new world for themselves there. So they knew of a people known as the pyramid builders that lived, in Africa and in Egypt, what is known as Egypt in this day, so they wanted to have these people who were master builders help them build this new world. So they started to go to the shores of Africa, and they came with crosses because they researched things there, and they knew some of our beliefs there. So by this time, Christianity was already established, and they came up there, because they knew about the Ankh, so they came up there with their crosses. When they arrived on the shorelines of Africa, they presented, once they arrived, they presented their crosses, to get off the shores there with these Africans there, because they came and confronted them, and they came in with these crosses there. And when they did that, it was so similar to the Ankh. And if you know the Ankh, the only difference in the Ankh and the cross is that it has a circular, the top on the circle which represents the woman's womb, so they believed that, that was kind of the same beliefs there. So they were able to get on the shorelines there and was able to negotiate with the Nasuts at this time, which were the rulers. So when they came on these shorelines and started to negotiate with these rulers, almost like that movie Shaka Zulu. If you ever watched Shaka Zulu, which was in the late 80s, it came out, and it kind of touched on a little bit of this negotiation, so they had some of these Europeans, that came in and they were negotiating, and I remember this scene where he was asking certain questions, the Nasut, the king of Africa in that area, was asking this white man these questions and asking, so he was saying like, so once your new world is built, what would you do with these black men here? And he was saying that, we will treat them pretty much as brothers. We'll give them their own land, and we will be equals, so, and he asked them a series of other questions there. And, he was just so forthcoming, and he was trying to be so honest about everything there, so he granted them, that, and they negotiated certain trades that they did there with that. So they asked for certain alcohols and certain things that they negotiated, and he was able to have, and when it, all the Africans along the shoreline, he wasn't able to go. They had a certain barrier that they had there that they couldn't cross there on the shorelines there. So they were able to get all of these Africans along the shoreline, and they can use them as their new builders, So, and that's what they did. It took a few years for them, but they started to come down, to the shorelines, and they entrapped all these Africans along the shorelines. They had all kind of booby traps and all these different traps that they used to capture all these people, and they started to put them on these ships there. And you've seen some of the movies there and what they did. They did a lot of different things and really just terrible things, putting them under these ships, and bringing them up. And a lot of them didn't survive this thing, and a lot of them jumped ship. And it was just a lot of things that happened during this trade there. But when they did come on, on this side of the world there, and they arrived in America, they were immediately brought, down. And this is where Black Friday started, So basically, almost like the NFL draft, where they would put these, these new slaves on, on these stages there, and they would present them. They would have this whole presentation there. They give them pamphlets to everybody that was coming in to auction and be a part of this auction there for these slaves. So, they would come in and they would present this new slave there, and they would, come in. They would say, for the males there, they would bring them in, and they would say certain things like, no disrespect, but they would say something like, we have a stout nigger, who's very fertile, and he's able to work all day, and he won't be much of a problem. He's very submissive, and he'll work in the fields all day with no problems there. And this is how they would present these slaves there, And when they would bring, just as an example, they would bring up the female slaves, and they had certain words for, the females in this time. So they would call, when they present this slave, they would say, we have a nigger wench, that's highly fertile. She's able to tend to the kids, and she's very submissive. She's so submissive that she'll be able to eat out of your hands, and they would start to auction them off at a certain price. And you would, if whoever won, they would go to the highest bidder, basically, And this is what Black Friday started from, and we still celebrate and, use this in this day, And this is why, I wanted to tie some of these things together to where we still kind of dealing with some of this, in this day and age, So basically, I'll get into the Willie Lynch letter from here. So the Willie Lynch letter was presented in 1712 AD, and Willie Lynch was from the West Indies. And he had a method there of controlling slaves that he thought would control slaves for over 300 years if used intensely for 1 year. So it was a method that was similar to breaking a horse, and sometimes they would use some of this white clean blood, like they would say, according to the Willie Lynch letter. They would use some of this white blood and mix it in with some of this black dirty blood, to make an ass backwards slave there that would give any problems there, almost like a weird donkey. Sometimes, they would mix these horses with these donkeys to make an ass backwards horse that would do certain things there, so they can have different variations of slaves, So they wanted some slaves that would be able to work in the field. They would want some slaves that would be more softer, that would be able to tend to certain other things there that they had there, because this was a business for them. This is for their economics, and So in this method that Willie Lynch presented, he would use fear, for these slaves there. So he would use their age. So he would look at their age. He would look at the colors and the shades. He would look at their intelligence. He would look at their aggression. He would look at their size. He would look at the size of the plantation. He would look at the sex, Then he would, he would use the old against the young. He would use the dark-skinned versus the light-skinned. And he believed that slaves must trust and depend on the white slave owners for this good economics there, because if they started to trust and believe in their slaves, they would work against them. So that was something they didn't want, because they did have a problem. This is why Willie Lynch came in and had to present this issue to them, because a lot of these slave owners was having problems with their slaves. They're coming in and killing some of them off, and killing off, their whole families, because, for freedom, So they wanted to come up with the fail-safe method to be able to keep these slaves in line, So for orderly future, special, particular attention must be paid to the female and the young offspring. Both must be crossbred to breed a variation of division of labor. Psychologically and physically, instructions of containment must be created for both. Break the will to resist, both the horse and the black man. If you break the female mother, she will break the offspring while they're young, and she will deliver them up to you for a normal female protective tendency. You know, this was part of this philosophy and science that he came up with. You know, when it comes to breaking the strong slave, to make a complete reversal of the mind, so they would take the meanest and most reckless slave, strip him of his clothes in front of all the slaves, tar and feather him, tie each leg to a different horse, faced in the opposite direction, set him on fire, and beat both horses to pull him apart in front of the remaining slaves. Or they would just beat the slave to the brink of death in front of the slaves. Don't kill him, for he could be useful for further breeding or future breeding. And they had a little bit of a different method when it came to breaking the female slave. You know, so what they would do is they would run a series of tests to see if she would submit to your very desires willingly. Test her in every way, because she is the most important factor in good economics. If she shows any signs of resistance in submitting completely to your will, do not hesitate to use the bullwhip on her. Don't kill her, because in doing that, you spoil good economics. When in complete submission, she will train her children to submit to all whites and their very needs. You know, so it was a science that, like I said, to everything that they were doing. With this process, they have reversed the relationship in black women natural state. Slavery reversed our natural state of mind through this process by burning and pulling the men and scaring the female slave into submission. By her being left alone, unprotected, with her male image destroyed, this ordeal caused her to move from the psychological dependency state to a frozen, independent state of mind. She will raise her children in reverse roles, in fear of the young male's life. She will psychologically train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong. And she will train her daughters to be independent. What do you have? The woman out front and the man behind her, scared and weak and timid. A perfect situation for sound sleep and economics for the slave owners. You know, so this is part of this philosophy that Willie Lynch established with these, you know, slave owners. And it worked, you know, pretty much to perfection, you know, for these people, you know. And we still have certain remnants of this stuff there too, because, you know, and I wanted to touch on, they would use some of these slaves there and variations of these slaves there that were bright. You know, some of the time when you had certain slaves that wanted to read or wanted to, you know, branch out, they would kill them immediately. But some slave owners would utilize some of these slaves there, and they would, you know, because there was a slave owner, you know him very well because his name is Edison. You know, he has all these power plants and all these light bulbs that he had, you know, but at this time when he went down and he discovered this slave there, and I forgot his name. I wish I knew his name right off the top of my head. I should have researched him, but I just thought about this, you know, but he used this slave there, and this slave presented, you know, a light bulb to him that was able to sustain a light that, you know, was highly sustainable for long periods of time, you know, instead of having to use candlelight, you know. And when Edison found out about this, he took this patent to the patent office, and when the patent office asked him, you know, to present the blueprints, you know, for this new idea, he had to call his slave in with the blueprints, and he was the one who presented and explained the whole blueprint and this whole method here that he had, you know. So Edison had no idea how to present any of this, but he went down to the patent office and he signed this stuff and made a fortune, and the family's still making a fortune off this slave's idea to this day. And this happened with a lot of slaves there throughout this time. There are a lot of slaves, and you'll find out, and I'll give the list on there, later on, to the links of all these slaves that made all of these beautiful inventions there that these slave owners utilized and made a fortune off of, So another thing that we don't realize, but we deal with and do all the time, is eat chitlins, And a lot of our families, it's a tradition to eat chitlins. But in this slave time here, in this time when, we were in slavery, we were forced to eat chitlins. It wasn't something that we wanted to eat, but the slave master had to feed the slaves. So they would eat all of the whole pig. And they said, "Now we got to feed these slaves something." So they would give these slaves the intestines. They would just dump this big old trough of intestines right there, and they had to figure out some way to make this a meal. So this wasn't something that they wanted to eat. This is something they were forced to have to eat because they had to feed their families. I'm sorry for this light here, but so they had to feed their families some way. So they found a way to make this disgusting meal something that is a tradition and something that people love to this day and will fight over to this day. And you'll be in trouble if you don't want to eat it with certain families. They'll feel almost offended. And no disrespect to anybody that does love chitlins, but it is something that was a part of our slavery, and it wasn't something that we wanted to eat. We were forced to eat this stuff there because all pig intestines is and all the stuff that they're pushing out is all of the waste, that's coming out of their intestines, and it takes a process there. And this is really just bowel movements that's moving through their intestines that we're having to move out to be able to eat this stuff there, And this is what we had to eat to survive, So that's what was going on here, So they had this process, again, where they divided and conquered all of us there to break our will there, so we will never consider working together to rise and to be a nation of our own, And again, there's certain things that they still do to this day there to keep this kind of going on because they don't want a black family to be strong and prominent, here in so many ways. It's a science that they're not going to sit here and tell you, that this is what they're doing, but this is kind of what they're doing here, in so many ways there. Give me 1 second. So we have to really understand this stuff there in so many ways there and think about this stuff that's going on here in this world because it's a lot, And also the slave trade, it's all about utilizing you because they knew that we were special and they can't just let us go. We can't just be someone they can let go because they always had a fear that we would latch on to someone else and be upset about what was done to us. So they always tried to mask our history on what really happened with us. Let's get this. Let me switch this over here a little bit this way. That light is just all in the way there. I apologize for that, but this was a scientific, strategic method that they used there, and they're still using it today. If you ever talk to them or talk to anybody about trying to unite as a nation of our own there, because there's people in the UN with 15,000 or 1,500 people that went to this UN and they was able to be a nation, So we should think about this stuff there. And I don't want to start harping and ranting on this stuff there, but I did want to present this, to you. And I want you to think about this stuff there, And again, I want to let you know I love everybody, man, And I just want to do my part to present this stuff so you can't say that you haven't heard it, And, again, this is a passion project for me, So it means a lot to me. So I'm going to try to play a little bit of this Willie Lynch letter if I have time here, just so you can hear a little bit of it. So just bear with me here and just hear it out here.